all. The Honourable Annette King.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I want to go back to the very first submission that was made on this bill several months ago, and that was the submission from the Law Commission. In fact, the Legislation Advisory Committee of the Law Commission. And their job is to look at legislation, to give advice to government, and I have found in my experience that they give extremely sound advice on legislation, and most often governments listen to it. What they said, Minister, was that the Social Security Act itself is the worst statute that they've ever seen, and this Parliament has. They said it's a dog's breakfast, it's incomprehensible, it's been amended close to 50 times, it's a disgrace, and it needs to be repealed rather than revised, and that it was incumbent on Parliament to produce good quality laws. I say to you, Minister, rather than put through this bill that is yet another series of amendments to the original Act, take the opportunity to be the Minister that does do a whole rewrite of the Social Security Act. It is a wonderful opportunity to work across the Parliament to get agreement on what ought to be in a totally rewritten Act. It was an opportunity I had with the rewrite of the Policing Act. And over a 2-year period, we were able, with the help of the National and Opposition and the other political parties, to rewrite legislation where we got agreement on every issue except one around whether police officers could actually be local body candidates. With that one exception, the entire bill that was 50 years old was rewritten by this Parliament with wide buy-in on the approach that we would take. This is a fantastic opportunity, Minister, to rewrite that Act, to be the Minister that does that, rather than bring in some amendments, more amendments, to a piece of legislation described as a dog's breakfast, incomprehensible and a disgrace. And I would say that you would get far more cooperation and agreement if such a process was put in place. Look at what ought to be part of modern legislation for the 21st century. What are we trying to achieve from Social Security legislation? And I do not believe there are members of Parliament in this House that do not want us to have a good, sound Social Security system for those who need it. And that is what has been in place for many years, a Social Security system to support people when they need it. It's got lots of patches on it and lots of things that don't work well and lots of contradictions. Why not rewrite it? All this bill does, Minister, is add a few more patches to this very tatty coat indeed. And I think what the Minister is doing in these amendments is losing sight of what you have Social Security for. And what I think is really sad about this piece of legislation is that those who are going to suffer the most from it are the children. And I would like us to stop for a moment and think where we put children in New Zealand in terms of legislation. You see, I believe the child of a beneficiary is just as important as any child that I've had, or my grandchildren, or any other member of this House, or New Zealand, in fact. Those children are just as valuable. Those children deserve the same investment in their lives as we would want to see put into our children and our grandchildren's lives. And that is why this bill, I have to say to you, is not right, the member for Hamilton West, because it doesn't have the key elements that would support a child who is being raised in a sole parent family, for example. What is needed? You need to ensure that the carer of that child has the opportunity to move into the workforce. What do they need to move into the workforce? They need the ability to have education and training. And one of the amendments that I have put up is treat education as if it was work. If they are being educated, if they are getting training and education, treat that as if it is work because they're looking to move their family, Mr Chairman,
The Honourable Annie
because they are looking to move themselves from a benefit and to be able to support their family with education. That is the first thing. If they have got education and they need to be retrained, invest in their retraining. Say to them, you can start it quite early. You can say, we can help you train so that when you do go into the workforce, you have a job that actually does support your family. Because one of the problems when you push people into work and say 15 hours work at a low-paid job, they aren't any better off. First of all, at 15 hours, they don't get the in-work tax credit. So if you're going to send them back to work, at least make it 20 hours, because then they would be eligible for the in-work tax credit, and there is a little more assistance for them. But I would say that helping them get the training and the education so that they get a job that will take them out of poverty, that will take them with a career path, would be two of the key elements that you would put in place with legislation. The second one is strong parenting support. Being a parent on your own, the Minister's been a parent on her own, so many members in this House have identified themselves as sole parents, and so was I. I was not a sole parent on a benefit, I was a sole parent, working and raising a child on my own. And I know how hard that is. I know how torn you are when you're trying to go to their sport, you're trying to do your job, you're trying to provide for them, and you are it in the main. And I know how difficult that is. So what you need to have is parenting support alongside them. Parenting information and education. You know, we're really bad at that in New Zealand. You go to some other countries and parenting education is available, universally available to every parent in a whole variety of different ways. You've got to have adequate income for them to raise that child. And we have got some extremely sad stories that are appearing. And I don't believe that you've got people who write these stories that are necessarily always sympathetic to beneficiaries, but they're writing them showing that there are beneficiaries who have insufficient income to be able to care for those children. And when it comes to a job, I say to Minister, what do you think about the refugee woman who's on the sole benefit? Because I have a lot in my electorate. They've come from places like Somalia. They came because they were single women with children, no partner. They don't speak English. It's very hard to get a job. They're not going to move off the benefit in a hurry, but when their child is sick, the pressure that goes on them because they haven't got into the workforce is huge. They need a lot of support. They need a lot of supported income and parentings and so on. The other thing you need is quality childcare. Do we want the children of beneficiaries to put in low-quality childcare just so we can get them to work? Why should they not have access to high-quality childcare and after-school care when their children go to school? You see, if you have a look at this bill, the standards for our out-of-school care are being reduced, so that in fact you only need to have one person looking after them in out-of-school care. And they can do it now in private homes. I thought we'd try to get away from that approach because it opens it up to all sorts of problems and likelihood of abuse. So having high quality out-of-school care is very much part of what you would provide. You also want to have flexibility. Flexibility for sole parents to be able to care for their children, to be able to be with them after school, to have a job where they can have school holidays, because who is going to look after them when they're on their own? You also need to have all those early intervention services, and that's just some examples of what you would be putting into good legislation if you were really, truly wanting to move people from a benefit and into employment and long-term employment with the ability to take primary responsibility for themselves and their family. That's what a government would put alongside them so they could take primary responsibility. Not this approach, which has seen the cut to training incentive allowance, that's seen a punitive approach put in place if they don't take up a job, that doesn't provide enough in child care, that doesn't go for quality and assistance to these people. that has more of a compulsory budgeting if they get themselves into trouble rather than being